In this third video, we will define risk. You'll recall that in video 2, we defined a hazard as a source of potential harm, usually due to the embodiment of a source of energy. Now, we're going to look at the risk associated with a hazard. Risk is the chance of something happening that will have a negative impact on objectives. Now, we can assign a bit more of a quantitative value to our definition of risk. We can say that risk is the product of the probability of a hazardous occurrence and the consequence of the hazardous occurrence. So, probability being a value between 0 and 1, where 0 is impossible, 1 is a certainty, and any number in between is going to be a measure of how probable or how much confidence we have that a thing will occur. Consequence is what cost, typically, will be incurred by a negative outcome. So that would usually have a dollar value assigned to it. So let's look at some examples to solidify these ideas. Probability of occurrence. Thinking back to the unsecured load in a truck, if you have two companies, A, that trains its employees to secure their loads in trucks, and company B, that does not train its employees to secure loads, then the probability that a worker could get hurt is probably higher for company B that doesn't train its workers to secure those loads. So that's probability. Now, how about the consequence of the hazard? Thinking back to the large mining vehicle running over the pickup truck, we can see immediately that there would be a cost associated with replacing the pickup truck. As you can see there, it's totaled. And if there was anyone in the pickup truck, then there were likely injuries, possibly fatalities associated with the incident. And so there's going to be a cost associated with that. And that needs to be incorporated into the consequence calculation. So now, if we look at an event with a high probability of occurrence and a high consequence of the occurrence, we take the product of those two, and semi-quantitatively at least, we would then say this is a high-risk scenario, a high-risk hazard. So let's work through a few more examples to really solidify these differences. Taking a riff off the unsecured load, let's think about an empty box on a shelf. Now, say the box is on the bottom shelf, pretty close to the floor. What's the probability that it's going to fall off the shelf? Well, probably pretty low because it's close to the floor. Now, what's the consequence of this empty box falling off this low shelf? Probably not a lot. It's empty, so we don't have to worry about anything breaking in the contents of the box. It's light, so probably not much of a hazard to whomever it hits, but would still be a tripping hazard. So there's undoubtedly some consequence associated with this box being on the floor. So we'll say a low consequence. So if we take the probability low, consequence low, we then say that an empty box on a bottom shelf is a relatively low risk situation. Now, what if we change things up a bit? Let's say this box is on a middle shelf, say about 1 meter off the ground, and it has 10 kilograms worth of electrical equipment in it. Let's work through this again. What's the probability that this box will fall off the shelf? Well, I think we can say it's a higher probability, since it's further from the ground. And how about the consequence? Well, if it falls, the electronics equipment could be damaged, so that would be a cost, a consequence. And 10 kilograms, that's enough that could hurt someone. 10 kilograms hitting someone in the wrist or whatever might injure them. So I think we can agree that the consequence and the probability in this example are both higher than in the previous example. So why don't we assign a medium probability and a medium consequence to this box on a middle shelf with some electronics in it. That means that this situation is a medium risk situation. And as a final thought experiment, let's consider a box on a top shelf. So it's about 2 meters off the ground. It's above everyone's head. And let's say that the box contains glass bottles of strong acid, weighing about 20 kilograms. So, what's the probability of an occurrence here? Well, once again, it's higher off the ground. In fact, it's above everyone's head, so I think the probability of occurrence is greater. It's harder to manipulate things above your head. So we would assign perhaps a high probability to this situation. And now what about the consequence? Well, once again, I think we can safely say that consequences are going to be more severe. I mean, glass bottles, they could break. Strong acid, if that were to spill on even just the ground, but say on a worker, either of those would be very bad. And, well, gee, it's so high, we could end up with the box hitting someone in the head, which would be clearly a much more severe consequence than the damaged wrist that we were perhaps proposing for the middle shelf. So in that case, I think we have a high probability of occurrence, a high consequence of occurrence. Thus, having glass bottles of acid on the top shelf is probably a high-risk scenario. Alright, this is the end of video 3, where we have defined risk and its two components, probability and consequence. The product of the probability and the consequence gives us a at least semi-quantitative description of the risk. And next we'll move on to assessing risk. But first you may proceed to quiz 3.